Welcome, everybody. This is a workshop on how to value your services, cost estimating for pricing. My name is Kevin Donnelly. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Program Management here at DEC. My division is responsible for kind of the cross-cutting technical services to support project delivery within the agency. We support both infrastructure and public buildings. In that capacity, we're responsible for quality, safety. We have cost estimating, project controls, engineering audit function, internal audit function, ITS services, systems and metrics. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to introduce the panel in just a second, but before we do that, I'd just like to kind of know who the audience is and who's in the audience. Some of you guys I know. For those that don't know me or that I don't know, how many contractors? Okay, and consultants? Okay, so about half and half, some bipolar, schizophrenics we have here, Hassan. Well, thank you for coming to the panel. I hope this will be informative to you. We want to talk about how to be successful, how you can be more successful in bidding and estimating the jobs. You know, estimating is a piece of pricing, right? It's not, the other piece of that is your risk and your profit. And you make or break yourself and your success of a project depending upon your pricing. You know, we all hear the stories of, I left money on the table, right? You know, but if you didn't, you won't get the job because we are a low bid, typically a low bid organization for our public infrastructure. So with that, we're going to have a diverse panel. I'm going to introduce the panel. First, I'll start with Alexandra Chansey. Chansey?
Yes. Alexandra Chansey. I'm president of DAC Consulting. We are a construction consulting firm. We've been in business for about 18 years. And we work with contractors, developers, architects.
Chris?
I'm Chris Iguatu, Engineering Audit Officer for DDC. I'm responsible for auditing all DDC contracts. Some of you may know me by now.
I'm Hussam Ahmad. I'm representing my construction unit today called Hasa Construction. I'm the member and owner of the Hasa Construction.
All right.
Parag Kapadia, Parkanta Electric, and we're a second generation electrical construction firm and certified city and state MWBE. And we do primarily, I would say 95% of the work we do is city and state public buildings.
And Deborah.
Hi, I'm Deborah Bradley, president of Deborah Bradley Construction and Management Services, Inc., now DBC. We're a general contractor and construction management consultant. We primarily do general contracting at-risk work for public agencies for city and state both, and certified MWBE and DBE.
Good. And let me just ask one more question of the audience. For those of you that are contractors, how many of you have done work for DDC? Or maybe how many haven't done work for DDC? Are looking to win your first bid? Okay. So hopefully, yes. So hopefully we'll have some good pointers here, and we can share some secrets of what might help your success in the future. The consultants here, I'm guessing, are primarily looking at this from where we go out and we procure CM services. And as a CM or resident engineer inspection services, oftentimes you're called on to estimate jobs or estimate change orders as part of that service, and that's an area that, so once you win the job, the nature of almost every job is change. It's what we're in the change business. If you think you're going to make money on change orders, or you're going to change a bad bid into a good bid from changes, probably not a good strategy, and I'm hoping the panel can talk a little bit about that. But Chris Iguatu, one of the things we'll talk about during the panel discussion is how we approach the change order, the contract provisions, because there's some very specific provisions in the contract on how you price and how we negotiate our change orders. So that's important for you to understand, because ultimately, that's part of your total project. So there's the headshots. So is there anything else? I'm not familiar with this. Is there another slide? Okay, just leave it at that. So let me sit down and we'll start the discussion. And I've got a few questions maybe to get the discussion started, but I'd like to ask the audience if you have a question. I'd like it to be a little more open format. But let me just throw out the first question to the panel. How important is industry intelligence in developing your bid, especially bid for an agency that you've never worked for?
Very important, right? It may give you the competitive edge if you know that if you know that the agency always goes with the low bidder. Well, they typically go with the low bidder. If you know who typically bids there for the agency and you see how they bid, you could see maybe they always tend to lowball. Gives you that edge, you know that. Then maybe you need to sharpen your pencil more when you bid. So it's like anything else. It's just information that you have. It makes you that much more knowledgeable, and then it gives you that competitive edge, I think.
Anybody else?
I wholeheartedly agree. And even the bidding season of the client is important. At the beginning, it tends to you have twice as many bidders as towards the end. So it's not necessarily, a lot of people want to come out of the box, gaining that first job so then they can breathe. Versus my strategy would be actually closer to the opposite. Hopefully you have some backlog going into it and you sort of wait it out, see where the numbers are coming. Towards the end of the bid season is when you have less bidders and people are starting to bid higher. And then also watching that engineer's estimate is extremely important, and it depends on the agency. So you get a feel for it, and ask your colleagues or peers or whoever, if maybe it's an SCA job and typically maybe 10% above bid is generally the range it comes in depending on when you're bidding. Or if it's something like New York City Parks, you're like 30% above bid. So industry intelligence is extremely important. You really do have to know your client.
Sam, what about you?
Yeah, I guess obviously intelligence can only help. So knowing the client and knowing the client's expectations and how tough they are, how responsive they are. For example, our biggest problem is that we did many projects for the DOT, state DOT, but this is our first DDC contract that we are almost 90% done. And we learn, I think when you get a responsive client and most of your issues are resolved in the field, at the field level, those are the best situations. And for each minor stuff, if you have to go back to the designer and to the agency and all that, and it takes another month while you have equipment and your labor waiting for the decision, and that is a problem. We need to know the nature of or the character there, the environment in the client, how the issues are resolved. Are they resolved in the field level or the office level? And so we have to have a cushion, some contingencies, put in for that, unless unfortunately those contingencies will eventually become a change order. I know the agencies never like a change order. Actually, we don't like change orders either. We would rather have all the responses and finish the project ahead of time and walk away, because then you need more time, and more time is much more overhead for the company, for our supers and managers, and to be in that project for another year. It costs more money. So it's a very bad situation when that happens, I think.
So Parag, when you're looking at a set of contract drawings, and that's for a project that's out for bid, Hassam touched on a few things related to contingencies, which relate to risk in the job. When you're looking at a set of drawings, how are you evaluating risk and figuring out how much contingency, or what are some of the factors that come into that?
Well, first of all, so I was going to mention absolutely incredibly crucial to very carefully review the approved set of drawings and specifications. Your specifications will ideally, essentially, for the most part, become the Bible for the project. So really, it's incredibly important to review that in detail. Also, pay attention to the general conditions. Okay, so not just your obviously covering your labor, your material, your equipment, but also a lot of contractors do tend to overlook general conditions, and they don't tend to properly price that into their project. So that could be anything from, you know, manning the project in terms of your project management, having, you know, your safety supervisors on site or part of the project, or specific special access, logistical things like that you really need to pay attention to, because you know, you may end up leaving money on the table. So.
I didn't hear anybody speak about the environment, going to the job location to see what
And
the
the other
environment
thing
is
is,
like.
I was actually going to bring that
So
up, but it's
that's
also very
absolutely
crucial to
important,
make
yeah.
sure you go
Yeah.
to the pre-bid meeting. Whether it's mandatory or not, you know, make it a point to actually show up and ask questions. And if your questions aren't answered on site, RFI, you know, put that in there. So,
I like that when you say to go to pre-bid meetings,
Yes,
because you can't
absolutely.
assume anything.
Right.
Because the practices of the agency may be different from the other agency you worked for before.
Right.
So it's very important to look at the drawing, try to understand it. Maybe your understanding may be different from what is intended.
Exactly.
Understand the intent of the contract itself. Ask questions, as many questions as you can. Even after the
what we
pre-bid
find
conference,
is,
you can still
unfortunately,
call up somebody.
what-
And like Hussain said, you need to know the players in the agency, who to talk to, who knows what, who to contact for what particular issue or not. If you don't, you may be
Right.
stuck with the project manager in the field, and that takes its toll sometimes.
Yeah, unfortunately, what we find is sometimes you may actually show up to the walkthrough and you have 25 questions already off the top of your head, but they may not be answered specifically then and there. So just make sure, be prepared to submit the RFIs and follow through it, and keep a detailed record of the RFIs and the responses.
So I would add that it's important to ask questions during the bid. If you don't ask a question during the bid,
You don't.
you may lose rights to claim of a change condition after the fact. So it's very, very important. There's things.
But that's a risk that some of the contractors take, because I know some general contractors, sometimes they see that there is something that's not quite right, but they feel that it could be an advantage to them if they don't bring it up now.
Right.
That maybe some of their competitors are not realizing it.
Right.
And then that's a risk that they take, and then try to get a change order down the line or something like that.
And we take the exact opposite strategy, because if we see there was a possible conflict between drawings and specs or whatever the case may be, we want to ask that question pre-bid. So we want to put the bidders at notice, so that then they become aware of it and they don't underbid it, because then that's just a waste of our time. And so we like to make sure that the other contractors are aware of those questions versus the other way. We don't want change orders.
But I mean, if you do review your contract with your subcontractors before you put in your bid, because your subcontractor may not understand the full details of the
Absolutely.
contract, and you get stuck when, oh, you're supposed to do this, oh, I never knew that.
No,
And-
so we do as detailed as we can. It's tough depending on some of the agencies when your subcontractors don't submit the proposals ahead of time, because we try to do a scope review as detailed as we can, look for exclusions, especially, when you're talking about, the time that you can actually produce the work. So there's a lot of issues there, so I would suggest to all the subs, there's no real advantage to throwing in that bid at the last second. Because if I see too many exclusions or if I see an issue, I'm just not going with that guy. And so that's a problem.
For those of you that are familiar with DDC contracts, how many of you pay attention to addendum? Because you may assume this is the way it is, but the contract comes out as something different that you didn't pay attention to, and that may weigh into your cost also.
So when the bid comes in, and there were addenda issued during the RFP or the proposal, the bid process, you are required to acknowledge receipt of every addenda. So it is important, and by certifying and saying, I have received all the addenda and, you know, understood them, you know, or it's implied that you understood and you accept the information as being provided to you as part of that bid. So our contracts require a minority and women business participation, and oftentimes a bid or a project requires skill sets that you don't have in-house, and so you have to subcontract. How does that add risk to your project, and how do you weigh those kinds of considerations of maybe having a project where you find yourself having to work with a trade that you maybe haven't had experience with, or you haven't worked with a particular subcontractor before? How does that play into your risk and even your general conditions in terms of your project management and oversight?
It's always a risk, right? Anytime you're working with somebody that you don't know, there's a risk. So whether it's an MWBE or any other firm, it's a risk. Now, that other firm that you don't know may come up with a lower cost. So then, as a general contractor, that's where you say, okay, well, I'll go in with a lower price and then try to buy out the guy that I know, try to buy him out at the lower price. Or again, it's all, I mean, I think we all know general contracting has got to be one of the most, contracting in general. So risky because there's so many things at play, right? Just like you get the bids from the contractors, they're not complete, yet you carry that, you're not sure. Sometimes you don't have the time to do the scope review. And then when you get awarded the contract, you have to go back and actually make sure that you have the complete scope, and that right there is a risk. But working with a contractor, somebody comes in, he's a new guy, and then every time he turns around, he hits you with a change order as a general contractor. You don't know that at the beginning, I mean, if you use him. So it's
I think proper supervision is very important from the very start of the work itself.
I'm sorry?
Proper supervision. You
Right.
have to have somebody who is actually detailed in what the scope of work is to supervise all your subcontractors, the co-workers. But something else I was going to point out, how many of you have looked at the drawing from the point of view of who works next to you? Okay, you're not doing the complete work yourself. If somebody else is doing some part of the work, and you go to the drawing and look at your own section of the drawing and you end it. It's a big mistake. You gotta look at all the drawings and see how the other work affects what you do.
Right, coordination with
The
other
coordination,
trades.
not only coordination, what you're responsible for. For example, when you have electricians and HVAC people, they're wondering who's going to tie in here and who's supposed to do this. You have to look at the general conditions that mention who's responsible. We've had some of those cases, disputes between subcontractors, or contractors actually, who is required to do this and who is not. And if you don't factor it into your cost, it becomes a problem. But it's part of the contract, so it's not going to be a change order for you.
Right, and it's important for the GC who's bidding it,
Yeah.
when they put it out to their subcontractors and get pricing back, that, again, back to looking at the exclusions and what exactly they're pricing out, which drawings, because if something's included on an A drawing and not an M drawing, it gets missed, and there's always that by the time you buy out your subs, your contracts, all of a sudden they say, well, that's not in my contract. I mean, it happens to everybody.
What kind of challenges are you having in terms of meeting your MWBE goals? Are we finding that to be a challenge?
It's a challenge in I think in one way, it's an advantage in another way. Obviously, us being a certified minority firm as a construction firm, but honestly, we have not done any sub work as a contractor, and so we completed 6 projects, and not a single one we submitted as a sub to another company because of the cash flow issues and some other concern. And in most cases, we are bidding on the jobs that where we have a good relationship with the client. So as Chris mentioned earlier, if there's an issue, we can go and approach other people and resolve this. So yes, I mean, we are committed to meeting the MWBE goals, not only committed to meeting, but also exceeding the goals. And since we are all ourselves on MBE, so that also helps. However, when you are forced to use a WBE or MBE for a certain discipline or trade, sometimes you get stuck with a company that they are not very organized. They don't necessarily have the financial ability to invest the money in the contract. So I'll give you a good example is, I mean, you know, there are a lot of good MBEs. I mean, we all across here that we do a good job and we complete the job. However, there have been some experiences that I learned here in the city, our landscape, for example, landscaping firm, that they didn't have enough money. So buying the topsoil, buying the plants and all that. So they came to us and say, oh, we don't have money to buy the plants. Or we don't have money to buy the soil. So we said, okay, we'll help you because we don't want to delay our project. And we said, okay, we'll do this. Later on, it became an issue because we paid the topsoil and the company went into trouble, not delivering the product, not paying their people, prevailing wages and all that. And now I'm in trouble because that item was his or her item, and I paid for the item. And that money now the city or the state will demand, hey, listen, that was his item, the money has to go to him. You see? So we're in a trouble that we paid for the material and he's getting the money. And it's very difficult to resolve those kind of issues at the city level and the state level, especially if your project is federally funded, because the oversight is much more extensive.
Right.
So we ran into one or two situations with the city, not only with the city, but also with the state contracts.
So so you're raising a couple,
It's very
couple
difficult situation there.
interesting points there. One is of going a bunch of different directions here. Choosing your partner,
Yes.
vetting
Right.
the company as to
Right.
whether or not they are, financially
Yes.
able to carry the particular project. So they may be capable of doing a certain type of work.
Right, right.
The challenge is how big a bite are they capable of doing, right?
Right.
So how do you manage that? How do you vet and make sure that your subs, because ultimately, if you're the prime,
Very important.
we're looking to you, no excuses, get the job done.
Right.
But we also recognize, and I'm looking around the room, right, for my CMs and REIs here who, have had that experience, right, with that contractor who's in trouble. They're in trouble. And it just doesn't get any better, right? It's not good for you and it's not good for me, right? So how do you deal with that? Or what are some of the tricks?
Well, as I always say, build relationships. I mean, that's why you come to events like these, and my biggest complaint, and I'm on the GC and the sub side both, so I know both sides of the fence, but, always when the CMs complain, or not the CMs, the large primes, that they can't find qualified MWBEs, and you hear that complaint constantly. And I always say, well, you haven't actually done your job and reached out and tried to create relationships so that who's going to be able to do your projects. You'll know how to break up your contracts if that's the way you have to go. It's not that hard to meet the goals. You just have to actually do the outreach too. Not just send an email to 20 million different people who are on an MWBE list. And because that's not actually a responsible way of meeting your goals. I find it's not responsible. Responsible way is to really go out, find out from the marketplace who's out there, what they can do, and more like a team approach.
And that's actually, if I can add something, that's actually what you're saying actually helps you get ahead of the curve, because then when you actually have an opportunity on the table, you're not kind of scrambling at the last second to find somebody or find the
And don't
first
forget the
score.
planning aspect of it. You need to plan with them. You don't just give them a job and walk away.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Plan with them. Check what they're doing, follow up, and make sure that if they're having difficulties, you catch it on time.
So when you're pulling together your bid and you're buying out your different trades, and you get a low bid, right, for landscaping, but it's with a firm you've not worked with before, and but the next bid, is somebody you have worked with, but it's a higher bid. So the difference then is risk, right? Do I risk going with that lower bid, or do I take the more certain bet and accept the higher bid?
And lose a job.
And possibly lose a job,
Right,
right?
possibly, yeah.
Or you have to carry it as a contingency, right? So how do I'm seeing in your eyes that these are all.
I think it's definitely a business decision, right? It's how you decide to take, you know, how badly do you need the job, or, you know, it's, there's no one set way of doing it. I mean, I know some contractors, some GCs, they put in their bid using the lowest bid everywhere. I mean, they just go through the line and they just take the lowest bid. They figure that their competitors are doing that, that number is out there. So they're just gonna take their chances, they're gonna go in with a low, and then when they get awarded the contract, they'll deal with it. Now, I think with the SCA, you can't do that because you have to list your subs, but I don't know if with DDC.
You have to list your service.
DDC too, you have to list your subs,
That's
so
right.
therefore it becomes that becomes even more difficult, then it's almost like, but on some other, obviously on the private side, you can choose and do and change afterwards. So if you can't change your subs, I mean, that's a business
I
decision.
think-
Do you take the job and
I
then
think
after
when you
that
see
deal
a
with
very
it?
low bid, that's a sign for trouble.
Yeah.
Because my experience has been that most of the people who give very low bids don't pay the prevailing wage.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful. The state wants prevailing wage to be paid, and if you don't, you go run into trouble with us. If he doesn't pay, you're going to pay.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so it's a sign of trouble. You got to look at it very well. To try to discuss with them, why do you have this very low bid? Are you just trying to remain afloat, or are you sure that you're going to be able to pay?
So
your
we
level?
we do go through a process when we do get your
Yes.
bids, and we look at those, and we do evaluate them for responsiveness and responsible, we do a responsibleness.
Yeah, we do it.
Responsibility.
Responsibility
Do it,
determination,
yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so part of that is to look at the engineer's estimate and versus what the bid is, and if the bid is under, you know, significantly low, we'll be calling you in and we'll be having that conversation. And it's not uncommon for bids to be rejected and for bidders to be determined to be non-responsible or non-responsive is probably better. You miss something, right? And we can exclude you for being non-responsive to the RFP or to the request for bid. A non-responsible determination is not a good thing, and could affect your ability to win other work. And normally, if we had a situation where we were looking at a bidder as possibly being non-responsible, we would usually call them in and have a conversation, and usually offer an opportunity for them to withdraw their bid if in lieu of being found to be non-responsible. So you know, it's not a good thing. There's a lot of effort putting together a bid, a lot of late nights, a lot of, you know, last minute stress. You know, the guy outside the door with the pencil on the phone, writing the number in, right, looking at the envelope.
Yeah.
Right, I've been there, right?
Yeah.
So I get it, and you know, it all comes down to that. And but winning a bad job is not a win, right?
And we also, Kevin, I want to let them know that we're going through the history of your compliance with labor laws now before we award you the contract. We'll go through that and we'll submit the report to OMB before the job is awarded to you. So if you have a history of non-compliance, that's a sign of trouble. You may not get that job, even if you submit the lowest bid.
Right, so we're looking at that. So an unreasonably low bid, we would look at and say, is it even possible that you can be paying prevailing wage if your bid is so low? And you know, we're gonna be really challenging you, and if you really are serious about that bid and you really believe you can deliver that project, you need to be able to come in and be prepared to say, no, we've got some innovative process, you know, way of, you know, putting sewer main in that, you know, does, you know, better, faster, cheaper, you know, and that's how we're going to deliver that project at that price. But it's not. It's a tough sell and it's a risk for you, so you need to keep an eye on that. Hassam, you also mentioned about cash flow, right? Because these jobs sometimes a small business partner can get into cash flow problems. How do you manage? How do you manage that, or how do you vet that? How do you look at that?
Well, I think it's as we know, it's a hard cash business. So compared to the consulting community where we hire people and we get cost plus and you bill and you collect and certain fee. Here, I think, right from the beginning, from mobilization and working on different elements of the project, you have to pay your people, you have to pay the union, especially in our case, we are a union contractor. And in some cases, we even help our subs for certain things. I give you one example. And the bottom line is to be able to keep track of the quantities and have a meeting on a daily basis in the field to agree on the quantities. So when the time, the 30th or end of the month, that's how we bill, comes in, we are ready, and within a week, not more than 7 days, at least we try to do it, submit a invoice. And hopefully the DDC, and since they already agreed with our quantities and all that, we'll have no issue. And from there, we expect that we can get paid in 30 days. However, we all know that that's not the case always. There's one piece of paper, or there's another compliance or FTA requirements and other agencies' requirements of submit this form, submit that form. So I think you need an excellent communication and very organized structure to deal with all those other needs. Otherwise, your payment can be substantially delayed. In one situation that happened to us recently, that our invoice was sent back from CFO all the way down to the field office, which I feel is outrageous. I think whatever the issues are should be at that point, should be communicated with the CEO or on the top level of the, and should be resolved in a couple of days. So I know the reason why it's done. It's done because then our invoice is not on the clock. So you send it back, it's very easy for you to send it back, and it's already 60 days late.
Yeah.
All right? And now when I called, someone at the high level in the DDC, and they said that they don't have my invoice, which they didn't even care to inform us that your invoice has been sent it back to the field office after 45 or whatever days. And then I called my field people that where is the invoice? Make sure it goes out today. And they resubmitted the invoice. And so you can see all this unnecessary delay. I think it's a part of working for a bureaucracy or any large. So nothing personal. I mean, we do only government work. And the goal is to minimize the bureaucracy, because money is very important. I simply say that we pay our people every week in construction business and every 2 weeks in consulting business. So I think it's very normal for us to wait for 30 to 45 days, but beyond that, every day is brutal for a new contractor like me.
I want to say, with respect to making payments, this is a serious business for us.
Right.
In general, our metrics are pretty good.
Yes.
On average.
Sure.
Of course,
It is.
that's an average,
It
right?
is.
And so
It is.
that means that 95% of them are on that bell curve or are outside. And if you happen to be the one, life can get pretty miserable, right? So we are working on process, and I'm committed to doing that. And I would certainly like to hear about any issue that comes up if you have a project with us in that regard. As in my position here, I'm charged with ensuring best practices and fixing systemic issues with those kinds of things. There are a number of challenges, right? There's challenges with us internally, our systems, our processes, training our people, and also part of it's helping to train you, the community, right, in how to minimize that. And Chris is a fantastic resource for those kinds of issues that come up and how you can avoid some of the common problems. And we're going to be doing some more training around that with the industry in the near future. But that said, when you do have an outlier, when you do have some issue, there's a risk, right? And it's a cash flow issue, and it's real, and everybody needs to you need to have something and be prepared to deal with that.
Right. I think it'd probably be good for the people who process the paperwork in the agencies, for them to realize that when the contractors don't get paid, it's not good. I mean, I think that sometimes I come across like they don't even realize the impact. They think, I mean, I know one agency, they would take like a year to settle and change orders with contract. And then it was like, oh, yeah, like no big deal, not realizing that it really
It has an
impact,
effect,
it
yeah.
really has it's like, almost like training the people to say, hey, it's not just like you get your paycheck every week. It would be
I can
nice if they get paid
I
every
can
week.
speak to that, but before that, I want to address the issue Kevin asked about the financial responsibility with your MBEs or WBEs. You may have had a contract that worked with you before and did an excellent job, but when you bring that person in for the next job, do you check how many other jobs that he has to see whether he can actually manage this contract given the financial capability? It does factor in.
Right.
It's not just because you know him, he puts in a bid and then you accept it. You got to realize whether he has the financial capability to handle all these jobs.
I understand.
That comes into play. Coming into the payment issues you have, we do know that, and the change order issues. We have a process, and this commissioner, Kevin, is very much committed to making sure the payments are done on time. When you run into such issues about change orders and you're not getting anywhere with the field, call me. Because sometimes you may not know actually where your change order is. You think it's where they tell you it is. If you ask me, I can find out. My office can find out. And we can always tell you what the issue is. Because
Well, right, but
sometimes what the
DTC is
issue
good.
is
I'm talking
that some
generally.
contractors don't understand the mechanism of what is involved in the change order itself.
So there's things that we're doing as, in our agency to do better. But to the point, and to Chris's point, you may have a sub that you've worked with before and they're doing a good job, but they've got a job somewhere else that goes south, and all of a sudden you start wondering, how come they've slowed down, or what's going on here? And it's because they got another problem. So it's a dynamic situation, right?
It's a dynamic, and it's not limited to MWBEs.
Right,
I think
right.
you could
Oh,
have
yeah.
any kind of
Definitely,
sub,
yes.
and then
definitely.
they have a problem, right? I mean, that
Did you have a
happens.
question? You want to add something, Matt?
I just wanted to ask a quick question. With regard, since WB seems to be on the table at the moment, how do you handle dealing or finding specialty subcontractors who are not WBE to still meet or participate with the goals? Because I think the goal is to have everyone participating as much as possible, but you still have some select specialty subcontractors who are not MBE, but you still need that work fulfilled. Do you hold that subcontractor responsible for participating still?
Not
We don't
necessarily.
have goals for subcontractors, so there's no third tier goal credits on the third tier level. So
Okay.
Oh, DDC doesn't give
no,
credit?
I don't think so.
If I may,
I just
Just
have one
first
thing
year.
to add too, just for any MWBEs that are in the room as far as cash flow. When you're working with a prime, you can negotiate contract terms. So they don't have to necessarily always mimic the GC's contract with the prime, and same with the payment terms. So you can negotiate. You're going to get paid 30 days no matter what. Even if the prime doesn't, because we all know paid when paid is in every contract. However, that's not necessarily legal. It's not enforceable. So you can negotiate these terms, and the prime can negotiate back and say, okay, well, I either want a bond. If I can't get a bond, then I'm going to withhold 10%. I mean, so there is a give and take that will protect both the prime and the sub. So I would say, talk about those contract terms and get it out on the table so that you both feel comfortable and protected.
yeah, I think just wanted to answer the question from the gentleman, that we do utilize the services of a non-MBE. And if you're good in what you do in your trade, like for example, signs and signs installation, we have several companies that we know they're not minority or WBE, but they are really, really good in what they do. We use them all the time because they're very efficient, they're very timely, they're prompt, and they deliver. So there's no restriction. Obviously, you will always have a leg up when you do a good job and you're prompt and you know the specs and no headaches. Everybody will love to work with you. It's very simple, I think. But the point I want to make more important is, Chris, when the prime does not get paid in 30 days, I honestly believe there are agencies like state DOT, they pay us in 15 days. I just want to know.
15?
15 days. All right? And Port Authority, and by the way, Port Authority too.
SCA.
And Port Authority and SCA. So there are clients who are able to pay the general contractor in 15 days. I
There's a
mean,
little
that-
difference
that should
between
be
the,
I
the
understand.
authority and the other agencies.
No, I understand
Because the
that.
process is different.
But that's a city's problem.
This
A lot of it
and-
comes down-
and, you know, this goes back to that very first question, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Know the agency you're
Know
doing
the
business
agency,
with, right? There are some things that are really outside of the control
Yeah.
even of this
I
agency, right?
understand.
To manage, we still have to go to, in certain cases, we have to go to FISA, you know, and they cut the checks and mocks and certain
Sure,
things,
I know.
mayor's office of contract services. So we, you know, there's normally in the heart of the contract, things are rolling. It should be pretty smooth, but it's getting over those humps and those issues. The biggest thing are change orders, you know, and those need to get negotiated quickly. Oftentimes, you know, they may be things that are on the critical path or holding up work. We need to get it done. We ask to work at contractors to work at risk, and we owe a really expedited processing of those change orders and priority of those change orders, and that just needs to be made really clear. I also think that it's important for contractors and consultants to, you have to be on top of your project. You have to be on top of it in terms of, obviously, the work, quality, execution. But there's communications happening at the field level, and you need to have communication at other levels also. It's about relationship. It's knowing who to talk to, knowing Chris Equal to. When a payment's got, you know, maybe a deduction is being held, or you get in a notice. What we're trying to do now is identifying a deduction or a problem with a payment and not taking a deduction, but notifying the contractor first and saying, look, you're missing some paperwork here, we need it, because there are contract compliance requirements for this documentation. We may not get federal funding if you don't have certain things. But, you know, there's a lot of paper,
Yeah.
right? Without
that.
paper, our life as we knew it would not be possible, right?
But Kevin, that's the thing.
But it's, you know, that doesn't get the job done, right? It just makes
But it
the
costs you.
bureaucrats
Listen, let me say
happy.
something about change orders that you said. And sometimes, let me give it an example, TNA change order. That's the easiest change order
That's
to
easy,
put
yeah.
the funds for.
Sure.
But sometimes people don't keep records. And when you don't keep records, it makes it extremely difficult to see how much is the change order
understand.
and all of that. So even if the city project manager already didn't present you with paperwork, ask for it. It's your money. Make sure that they sign everything you do every single day. You
Yeah.
kind of sign. When it comes, there's no problem. The problem is when you come
There's
in.
no record.
No record. What do you expect the guy to do? How do you expect him to
Write a
estimate it?
personal check.
And I have been at a settlement. I've been at a settlement at the controller, and the
Right.
controller denied the guy $200 and something thousand. The guy was crying. I could feel for him. He had not one single piece of paper. The controller says,
Yeah.
"How do you want me to?"
How can I help you?
This is the thing, and I want you guys to be, aware of that. When you're told to sign a piece of paper, it's not for anything else. It's for your own, to protect you also. I mean, it's not there to give you additional work to do, just to protect you. It's your money. You're going to get paid. So in a case like that, when you have the paperwork, trust me, it will go very fast. And if you run into a problem, give me a call. I'll find out what's going on. Okay. And when you do a negotiated contract, sometimes it's tough because not only that the different people you deal with may not have experience in what you're doing or all the costs that you incur, but you got to sit down and go through things in a very timely manner. But you got to realize that in the end, it still has to come to my office to review. There are certain things that you think may, or they think may be in the contract, but you look at it, it's excluded from that change order. So you got to give room for something like that because you have to be transparent. This is coming money.
You gotta know your contract. We're running short on time, but I would like to go around the room and ask if there's any other questions or topics that we've missed that somebody would want to hear some discussion.
I
Yes.
just want to, I'm Paul Hitachi and my company's Hitachi Group, formerly Fetterman. We specialize in doing cost estimating and pre-construction services. And I frankly think that you're going to have a much more successful bid and a successful project if there's a lot more oversight in the design phase. I mean, because really, if you don't have a good set of working drawings or there's miscommunication there, that just trickles down and you end up with an unsuccessful project. The other issue is that, and as a sub, I particularly feel this pain, working for architects and engineers, is when the architect will do additional services and says, it has to come out of your own pocket. They don't bill for it. The architect makes a mistake, and I think that the agencies have to be more cognizant of this. That if the architect agrees to do something out of pocket, the whole team suffers. And I don't think that the agencies really are that cognizant of how painful it is when architects and engineers give away
Well, let me tell you
that
what.
should be billed.
Can I answer the question? Let me tell you what we do in that case. Sometimes architects actually do put something. They may see this, we don't like, we're going to change it.
Right.
The reason why they do that is because things change. But we force them to go back to the client to make sure that the client agrees
Right.
before you do that. If you don't get in touch with the client and you bring it in, we will force you to go back and get acknowledgement from the client. If you don't have acknowledgement from the client, we're going to say no, because the client is paying the money. You're not just there to change the contract any way you want, because the commissioner is the person that's responsible for changing the contract. And we have to also.
But you're talking about
Right.
non-material scope changes.
Yeah, right.
To your point,
Yeah.
we are governed by our oversights and comptroller directives don't allow us to pay for errors,
Right.
right? So if there's an error in the design, we believe that the city's position is that the architect is obligated to
Right.
correct that.
But if program changes? I have
The
an
program,
issue-
a non-material scope change,
Right.
where a client comes in and says, I don't like this room. I don't like this gym floor
Right.
that you just installed. We want a new gym floor. And that's a cost to the designer to respec a new floor. It wasn't an error or omission. Those are billable services.
Okay.
Sometimes there may not be funds in place that we need to, because it comes in at a point in time where it's like, where did that come from? We have design drawings that have been reviewed and approved and put out for bid, and we're 3 years into construction, and the new commissioner walks in and goes, I don't like that pile of dirt over there, or I don't like this surface here, it gets my shoes dirty. I want it changed. And you're weeks away or weeks away from signing a substantial completion, and and it's going to be changed. We're trying to get to where we have better communications with our customers, our clients, right? Where we're going to try and push back, because there are real challenges, right, with a change late in the game. When we have a non-material scope change to a contract that results in an extension of the time of contract in a damage for delays, environment, it's not just the cost of the change, it's the cost of all of the soft costs and all of the overheads and extended, all the designers, the architects, the CM services, the extended overheads for the contractors and the work. It becomes really, when you really understand that, a lot of clients say, you know what, maybe there's a better way to do that. Let's put it out as a separate contract.
Maybe I'll live with
Right.
getting my shoes dirty.
Exactly, right? So, but we need to do better as that manager, as that liaison between our ultimate client, project client, and our team, our project delivery team, to inform the decision makers of the consequences of a decision. Because historically, those things really weren't put on it. I just, all I'm asking for is, $50,000 worth of new monitors in these rooms. And yes, but it's going to extend the contract, it's going to require rewiring, it changes the fire alarm system, and now I have to go back to FDNY, and all, blah, 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 and it just, starts to unravel. So we have to do better at that.
If I may add, all hope is not lost. Anything you do on the job you feel is a cost. I urge you to maintain a written communication. Very good record of written communication, because you could put it as a claim. Sometimes people put it as a change order, they bring it to my office and say, this is not a change order, but it's a cost. So you go for claims, and the controller is the only one that can do that. So you send it to the controller, they may look at it, they never let you go without giving you something, I can tell you that, unless it's so egregious or something. And to me, I have a certain guideline to approve change orders, which I can't do anything about. So, but the controller has a bigger, way of making decisions. So
we want to
make sure
work.
it's written. Don't just say this person told me. Write it down. Make sure
We want to try to resolve as many issues as we can within the agency. We want to try to minimize the number of claims, but there are times where we're going to have to, where we will tell you, this, we need to push this to a claim, and when we do, we'll facilitate and help, process that. There was another,
I have actually two questions.
Okay.
One is on the specification side. Many times I've seen the specifications, even that's coming out in 2014, have information that is appropriate in 2001, not updated with the codes, not updated with the regulations. And then if we go with the realizing 2001 code cannot be applied, we try to implement, there are sometimes we get a resistance saying that, oh, you are not following the spec. Now, how many, I don't know, I'm just curious, is there a way the agency goes back and looks at
I can answer
when
that
those
question.
specifications are being updated? Is there any, I think you need a third party who understand the overall specifications, just to make sure that they are properly updated. And what I'm also noticing is nowadays everybody is in a pigeonhole. Nobody understands the whole project. And when they are working in a silo of their own fields, they're not able to understand, see the impact of one department over the other. So again, this one question to see how it is being done to avoid the problems. And also, to me, it looks like everybody thinks that, okay, I know this company or this person, so let me keep working with them. So by doing that, they are not trying to bring in new innovation or new ideas. And I think by doing that, there is no outside box thinking. So if certain things are done in a particular way, it is done the same way, and you are not giving an opportunity for new people to come in and present new ways of doing things. And at times, there is a risk with that. At the same time, if you understand and get a proper presentation and evaluate the risk benefit, you may be able to consider new people. That is from the construction side. Now, on the other side, earlier you were mentioning the DDC ensures that the people who are, the primes who are included as subcontractors listed are being used. How efficiently it is implemented? Because I know our company has been in many of them, and I do not see that's being done. And how that could be corrected?
Well, let me put it this way. We don't have an enforcement power between you and your subcontractor, between the prime and the sub. We don't. But when you bring them in and we look at the qualifications and say they're okay to do this work, you gotta use them. If you want to change them, you then have to come back again for us to vet them and then evaluate them again and see that they're capable of doing the work. So that's your relationship with your sub. We can't even really get into that. Okay. The only thing
So we don't tell you who to
Yeah.
use,
Right.
but we tell you whether or not we will accept a sub. We have a vetting process. We go through a subcontractor approval process. It's part of our, it's part of the contract requirements that as you come in, you have to fill out certain information. And we're trying to make sure that we're not doing business with unsavory.
I think you misunderstood my question. Suppose if I'm a sub, and my qualifications were included to support the prime, and we are considered as one particular exclusive area of expertise. That's how they were submitting the proposal, and you selected that firm. then subsequently they want to change for whatever reason. Or maybe they start their own department and they want to use that. How do you enforce that at time of submission of proposal and the part of evaluation? If you are considered our firm, how we get a chance to be part of the team?
Before you submit your proposal, we have no control over that. Once the proposal is sent in and is approved,
I'm talking only after that stage, after it has been approved and awarded,
and you comment, and they want to make a change. It's up to the contractor to make a change. You can't say you can't make a change. But the only thing is that you have to meet the proper qualification to make a change, and the reason why you're making the change. If we feel that your substitute is not capable of doing the work, we're not going to approve them. Okay? In the midst of doing the work after you have been approved, unless you have some problem on the job and they bring it to our attention, if they want to take you off the job, we're going to ask why. For example, when the payment comes in every single month, I have a form that they put all the subcontractors, the amount of money they agree with them, how much they paid them. And each time we make a payment, we send a form to our small business services at DDC to check how much work you're doing. And if you don't meet your goal, they send you a letter at a certain point saying you're not meeting your goal, why? And then you can say, well, because I didn't get this from this person, I didn't get that. And then we will make you a final payment unless you fulfill the goal. And there's an office in DDC that will check it to make sure that you met all your goals. And then they clear you before we make your final payment. So it's not like we're not helping out in that case, but a personal relationship between the two contractors is really there, so we can manage that. Okay. Speaking to your point where you said, unless you know the person, there's always a first time. Reach out to people. You just met me now, you just met Kevin, you want to know about DDC? Make an appointment. Have your questions. Come in, we'll discuss, we can tell you. We're here. We're not saying we'll meet with you. But if you don't reach out, nobody's going to know that you want to reach out. You got to make the first move yourself. Okay.
We hope that this events like today are helping to establish those relationships. Hopefully you've met and have a chance to meet people on the panel. I thank the panel for your participation. I thank everybody else for your patience and sitting through the conversation. Hopefully it was enlightening or informative. Maybe shared how we view things, some of the contractors, consultants, and DDC. And we really hope that you can be successful and will be successful, and we're here to be successful together on our projects. At the end of the day, we have a process where we have to be accountable to our taxpayers, ratepayers here in the city. But once we select a contractor, we're the delivery team. We have to be successful together. So it is important for us to work together to get you paid and to resolve these issues. And so and I talked about earlier about communications at multiple levels. If you're not getting things resolved at the field level, and that's really the best place to get them resolved, but sometimes if they're not getting resolved there, it's very important that you understand our organization and you work to form relationships at appropriate levels so that issues can get escalated appropriately and quickly when they need to be, and then they can get resolved. So,
if I may add this, okay, estimating and pricing is not just a mathematical exercise, it's an art also. You need to know where to move one thing or the other. He knows it better. If you just make it out
I just lost one job yesterday.
It's an art also. Like you keep good records that will help you track how you incurred costs in the past, and when you come across such a situation, next time you know where to put the money and where not to put the money. We can't just tell you if you make an estimate as $100,000 and you have all the different unit prices, where to put more money and where not to put more money. That's an art. It's not an arithmetical exercise. So you gotta pay attention to that also. Good records never hurts. Never. Yeah.
okay.
Definitely.
Anybody else? Any final words?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.